Well, let me remind everyone what PREE is. PREE is a digital online open access magazine that we started in 2018. There were 4 of us initially, and I want to shout out to Charmaine Lovegrove, who was very instrumental in the founding of this digital magazine. Life has taken her on a different path. She will be having twins soon, and we want to congratulate her and wish her well. And so we've been going since 2018. We are on our 7th issue now. We come out twice a year, online only. And what I realized very soon after founding it, after starting it, was that there were many friends, especially people who are from a previous generation of Caribbean writing, and other older friends and so on, who don't and are not used to going online, and definitely not used to reading online. And so it became obvious that they were not partaking of PREE, to put it simply. And I thought this was such a huge pity. So right from the get-go, we talked about occasionally bringing out a print edition of selections from the digital issues. And finally, 3 years later, we are bringing out our first print edition. It's called Bookmarked, and it's a very handsome object, a collector's item. And I want to now shout out to the designers, Cohen Shabaka, that's Nadia Cohen and Sarah Shabaka. They did a magnificent job. Let me just show you some of the, it's dedicated, by the way, to the past, present, and future of Caribbean writing. And, you know, it's beautifully laid out. We've kind of spared no expense with this publication because I believe that production values are very important. And for that, and for the ability to invest in this book, I want to thank the Prince Claus Fund, who supported us with one of their next generation grants. And one of the requirements of the next generation grant is that it is to support people under the age of 30. So in selecting the contributions that we published in the print edition, we did focus to as much as we could on publishing the work of the youngest authors who have published in PREE. And it is a really achievement that all of us are very proud of, and we can't wait for people to get their hands on it and to hear what they think of it. And what I want to do now, we're also, by the way, another shout out is due to the Shuttleworth Foundation, who gave me a personal grant at the end of 2019, which allowed me to dedicate more time to PREE than I normally would have been able to. Because let me tell you, bringing out a print edition is a huge task, and especially one like this, which is quite complex because it's divided according, there are these sections which correspond to each issue. There are 5 issues, selections from 5 issues here. Then I was able to prevail on an old friend of mine, Shalini Puri, who's a professor of English literature at the University of Pittsburgh, to write the foreword. And she produced a beautiful foreword, which I think I'm going to read a bit from, so that will also give you a better idea of both PREE's project and of Bookmarked, the first print edition. And by the way, it's not just the print edition. This is also the launch of our print arm, which is called PREE Inc. Okay. All right. So Shalini, in her foreword, describes PREE as a crossroads where Jamaica meets the rest of the Caribbean and strikes up an artistic conversation. She says, this beautifully curated print selection from the first 5 issues of PREE offers a glimpse of the richness of that conversation. As the title suggests, Bookmarked links web page and physical page. By this, I mean several things. In the most obvious sense, the book culls selections from the online magazine, bringing to readers who are more at home in the print medium a different arena of creative writing and giving them a point of entry into PREE's ongoing publication. But I also mean that the artistic experiments like PREE's, but I also mean that artistic experiments like PREE's in the digital medium have the capacity to transform Caribbean literary traditions and print cultures. PREE is artistic breaking news, and Bookmarked is a place to linger and return, a moment to savor and celebrate. I'm going to read a little more. She says in a different part of the foreword, Bookmarked is an additional gift to the Caribbean literary scene. It is the inaugural publication of a new imprint located in Kingston, an imprint by and for Caribbean writers. Whatever the locations, across whatever literal and metaphorical distances Caribbean writers write, Bookmarked brings their writing home. This allows a different and rigorous exploration of Caribbean selfhoods that is not framed by talking back, quote unquote, to a metropolitan audience. As the Jamaican patois word PREE suggests, PREE is engaged in a more urgent, intimate, and locally grounded placemaking. And I want to stop there for now and allow somebody else to speak.
Thank you so much for that, Annie. And yes, as we continue with this conversation, as we continue with this webinar, we'll get back to that idea of being an artistic experiment in the digital medium, and certainly throw that out there as a question to the panelists to think about what are the risks perhaps in taking artistic experiment or making experiment of your artistry. Is there always a welcome space for that in publications? These are parts of the conversation. So perhaps now I'll move to Luke Naima of Granta Magazine, and you can talk about your expertise and why this fits for you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Luke. I'm tuning in from London, and where I work at Granta. I'm originally from Canada, but I came out here, I guess, over a decade ago now. Granta, I've got a copy here. I think I might just show that off to you guys. Here's our latest. It's a print and digital publication. We put out about 4 issues of this magazine a year. Granta started out as, originally it was the Cambridge University Literary Magazine. When in that incarnation, it published people like E.M. Forster and Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, these sort of old guard English writers. Then in the 70s, it was sort of reinvented by a young American student who was there and a couple other British editors. They turned it into a magazine dedicated to just the latest in literary writing in this sort of paperback form, which publishes 4 times a year. So it's been running in that format since then. I'm currently working as the deputy editor, so working mostly with the print edition of each issue. But I also work, I used to work as the online editor. And when I first started at Granta, maybe 8 years ago, my job was actually to be a reader. So I was the person on the other end of the slush pile, which meant, you know, my job was to read all the unsolicited submissions, both for Granta Books, there's a publishing arm of Granta, and for the magazine. So I guess that's the sort of initial experience that I'm sort of bringing to this panel. You know, it's a difficult thing making those decisions and deciding what things need to be passed on for second reads, for the things that I would recommend. So yeah, just looking forward to talking to you all on that subject.
Thank you so much. All right, Diana.
Well, hi everyone and welcome. I'm a Jamaican writer and an environmental activist, in fact. most of my life I've written in secret, but started on the publication journey in about 28. My first book was published by PREE Press in 2010. So I'm a very proud founder member of PREE as well. I'm part of the group who first started to talk about this amazing product. So I feel very, privileged to be here today and happy to be here today. Yes, the print edition was a lot of work, Annie, but so was the online edition. So it's really good to see this happening. I guess I don't know if I want to call it expertise, but my experience comes from the side of being a writer with a whole lot of rejection under my belt. And I've recently, more recently now had this experience of being one of the people who reads the submissions that come to PREE, and most recently to be a judge for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 2021. And that's what really got me thinking about rejection, which has been a big part of my sort of writing life. And I write from here, I live here. And I think sometimes that has this extra dimension of how do you cope with rejection when you're not necessarily physically located in a big literary market. And then sitting on the other side of the desk, when I was the one reading the submissions and making judgments about them, I thought, boy, it would be really interesting to have a discussion about this, both just sort of, I guess, lift the veil a little bit about what happens when you send a piece in to, either a prize or to a, wonderful publication like Granta. And also to hear from, people as to, the questions they have about rejection and some coping strategies as well. I don't think ISIS, there's a writing place where there isn't any, so it's a question of how do you, perhaps give yourselves the best chance that you have, and how do you cope with, what sometimes can really be a heavy burden. So I'll stop there. My most recent book, I am very bad at book promotion, but my most recent book is, that's what it looks like.
Thank you so much, Diana. Okay, so since you, I think, brought a nice segue, a natural segue into this conversation, into this webinar, why don't we jump in, right? Why don't we think about what it is that you're finding, perhaps, and this is to all, Annie, Luke, and Diana, what it is that you're finding are the common mistakes, maybe the common failings that you see in submissions. Is there a kind of top 5 list? These issues come up and it's an automatic, it will have to go into a rejection pile. Is there a list?
You're starting with me?
Sure, yes.
So I don't think there's a list. I think the number one lesson I took from being, an editor of PREE and a judge of writing is that individuals bring themselves to a piece of writing. And, my colleagues at PREE will know, and, these are people, and our editorial panel is much, much wider than who is here today. These are people who are teachers and writers who we all respect greatly their work. And yet, despite that, we disagreed on many pieces. So that was really the first thing that I learned, was the person judging a piece of writing brings a lot of themselves. And as a writer, that's something that you really have to take on board. It's not a universal judgment of your work. It is the judgment of one or a few, if you make it past a first cut to a panel of your story at a particular point in time. So that's my caveat. Because as a person who I am, this is not true of everyone, I find myself, my frame of mind towards a story or a piece of creative work starts from a step back if the writer has not adhered to the rules of the competition. This is a very simple thing to fix, And so if a competition requires a certain font size, if they require certain margins, if they want you to put a word count, if they don't want you to put your name in the submission, these sort of basic things that most outlets require, please try and fulfill them, because you want the person reading your work to be in a state of welcoming, of excitement, of real happiness to be here, and you don't want to annoy them. And they're human beings who may have other things, bothering them. So, let's keep them out of being annoyed. That's my number one. And my number two, which probably there'd be a lot of disagreement about, is I have a particular aversion to obscurity that I feel like is being introduced for obscurity's sake. You know, I mean, I love lyrical writing. I love writing that challenges me a little bit, but I don't want to feel you are putting up obstacles in my way for no reason that I can see, you know? So I have found sometimes in the work that I've reviewed for PREE, I've wanted to, and in fact, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, I've wanted to speak directly to that writer, which happily PREE does allow. But I want to speak directly to that writer and say, you have some jewels here, some gems, but you've kind of tied me up in all this obscurity at the beginning that has made me not want to finish the piece. So I'll stop at 2, Isis, because I can go on for a long time.
Right. No,
but
that's great.
Those are kind of my top 2, you know, don't follow the rules and don't confuse me unless there's a really good reason for me to be confused.
Okay, so it looks like we might be able to build a kind of top 6 if we each add 2. So we've got those 2. Luke, I feel like you have something burning.
Yeah, sure. No, I think Diana makes a really good point about the way in which all reading is subjective, and so that's the place you're starting from as a writer. You have to find your audience. Personally, I think in writing, anything can be interesting, any subject, any scene, however simple, however banal, it's all in the telling. So for me, when I'm reading, I'm always reading for voice, for something. What I want when I'm reading is to recognize something of the author and the prose. And one thing we get a lot in our submissions is very polished writing, where it almost seems like the authors have taken such great care to sort of perfect each line that they've sort of almost shut themselves out of the story. And I think sometimes that comes, maybe, you know, a piece can be overworked in that sense. I think it's better, you know, I think as a reader, as an editor, it's better to stumble on something that's a little bit messy, but really alive and really honest, and feels like it's you know, vibrant and coming from a specific voice. You know, we're all specific individuals. Every individual narrative in someone's head is completely unique, and you sort of want to let that out in your writing. But then, you know, we're all reading stuff all the time, and I think there's often a compulsion to try and tone things down, try and shape it towards, you know, something else we've read or something that's a bit neater. So yeah, my first recommendation, or the first thing I'm looking for is voice, and don't keep yourself out of your writing. And then after that, I suppose another thing that I really love in writing is a very specific detail, character-specific detail, or place-specific detail. And so I think as authors, you know, you want to spend a lot of time with your characters and with the places they're in, and really try and visualize that and bring that out. So I think just taking the time to really deeply envision the psychologies of the people you're writing about, and their surroundings. You know, those are 2 recommendations I'll add to that.
Thank you. Annie, what is it that you put in the rejection pile automatically? What are the 2 big no-nos?
Oh, Annie, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. One of the things I've noticed coming through with some submissions is something that I've been the victim of myself in sending articles, you know, which I considered to be completely, you know, they were complete after numerous rounds of editing and so on and rewriting. This is now the final version. I've sent it off. And then to my horror, when I look at, for some reason, I might happen to open it just to check, and I realized that the track changes feature was left on. And so whoever is receiving it, who's usually a high up editor or something, is going to see all these terrible, you know, marks on your in your document, and you absolutely want to avoid that. And so when I receive something like that, I feel justified in putting it to one side and waiting until I have time to get back to the contributor and say, look, we can't consider this unless you send us a clean version. And sometimes you don't have time to do that, so it just gets left in the pile. So that's a very simple thing that everyone, including myself, need to be aware of and double check. And then the other thing that annoys me is, we have very specific instructions about not putting your name anywhere else, like on the other pages and so on. And then people just go ahead and have their names in the footer, so it appears on every single page, and makes it a little more work to anonymize the piece before sending it out for review. And yeah, so I can't immediately think of anything else. Most pieces get at least a read. We're not like Granta, which gets 10,000 submissions a year. And I would love to hear from Luke how they manage that. What is the system they use to manage that? We don't get anything near as much as that. We might get maybe 60 or 70 submissions for the two issues annually. So the scale is completely different, but I'd love to hear from Luke how they manage that.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, we get up to, I think most years, about 10,000 unsolicited submissions. So that's a lot of reading. And we're a pretty small team. We have four or five editors reading, so we just can't get through it all. So what we've done is we've set up a submission system online via a place called Submittable, and that charges a small fee. The idea being, before we didn't have any fee, and we were getting a lot of pieces in that just weren't finished, that they didn't read our guidelines. These are the things both you, Annie, and Diana have raised. They're just sending random pieces to us. So partly introducing a fee was to force people to think about what they were doing. And it's also a callback to the way that submissions used to be done, a small postage fee, the fact that you had to actually put your piece of writing, you had to print it out, put it in a letter. All those little steps actually force you to think about what you're doing. You don't just click and send it to 1,000 places. But the other thing that's allowed us to do is to pay a team of readers to help us read through the submissions. And so we have a circle of readers that we've put together over the years, people who we've worked with, who've come through Granta, either as on the editorial team or interning, or people who've been recommended to us. And everyone who joins, we have them do a test, and we're quite thorough of making sure that their sort of reading standards are similar to ours. Our taste is similar. So they'll do a first read, and they'll recommend pieces. So if they read 100 pieces, they might put forward 1 or 2 to the editorial team to read. So already you see that there's a sort of statistical chance in there of your piece getting picked out. I think great writing always stands out, but yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you're starting out, and it's hard when you're trying to break in, because you have to keep trying, and you have to wait until you get that reader who will recognize your writing. So after those are put forward to the editorial team, we read them, we discuss them as we discuss all the writing that comes into Granta, and we make decisions based on that. At the same time, sort of competing for our attention is another raft of submissions that come directly into us, the editorial team. That'll come from authors we've worked from before. They'll write us directly. We're always reading publications and reaching out directly to authors, asking them to submit. And above all else, we have a huge amount of submissions from agents. And agenting, I'm sure, is a subject that'll come up in this forum, in this discussion. It's, I think agents have become increasingly dominant, I think, especially in the UK and the publishing scene here. I think it's because there's so many people submitting, a lot of publishers here now only read submissions from an agent. They've closed their open submission systems, with the idea being that the agents then do that work. They're the ones who sort of discover that talent. And all agents do take unsolicited submissions, or most agents do. I think some of the biggest agents personally will have a closed list or will not be looking for more clients, but most are looking, and there are a lot of great young agents out there who are looking. So that's another thing to think about, another side of that conversation. Yeah, because partly rejection is based on the ways in which you're putting your piece forward to be seen. There are lots of different avenues you can take. Diana, maybe you have some thoughts on that in your journey, sort of bringing your writing out.
I think the thing that I learned, and I learned it the hard way, is not to write to prizes or particular publications, right? To write, and it comes back to what you were saying about voice and excitement. To write something that you're excited about and you have this strong wish to put on paper, and work on it for, to a degree, and then put it down so that you have this stable of pieces that are available. And then when prizes come up, because, if you're a writer, you start subscribing to places, that when there are competitions, that when submissions are open, then you go through your stable and try and match what you've written to the particular outlet or prize. Sometimes I sensed in reading the Commonwealth pieces that, and those are also a large amount this year, it was 6,400 submissions. Some of the pieces, I got the feeling that they were written to the prize and the writer had run out of time, so it hadn't really been, thoroughly edited, properly fleshed out, or even thought through. And in some cases, there was almost a feeling that the writer had gotten sick of it and had not really finished it, So I think, and you often don't have a lot of lead time to, open calls or prizes. So I think it's better to keep working on your writing all the time and sort of create this bank of stories or nonfiction pieces or poetry that you have. And then when you see opportunities, you then try and match what you have written to them. And that step is important, because it's important to know what people publish. Not everybody publishes the same thing. So, it's no sense sending, something that's just unsuitable for Granta. You're just setting yourself up for those rejections. So that's what I have to say about the writing process. I think you have to try, and it's hard not to, because you tend to feel, well, I have to get publication, I have to get my work out there. But I think if you center yourself on what is it you want to say and what is it you want to write about, the products that you have are better. And then don't rush, I would say, you finish something and you're like all excited about it and, oh, this is going to make the huge difference. No, let it sit, let it cook, as a teacher will tell you, for a good while, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, which is why it often doesn't work out with a timetable. And then go back to it. You'll find lots to fix. And then when you're reasonably happy, I totally agree with Luke, don't over edit, don't make your piece flat, so that it's very competent, but that's all. And wait for the right opportunity. And I will say, there is a certain amount of luck involved because the numbers are so high. When you get rejected, the very first thing you do is you send it somewhere else. So just don't bother, sit around I've learned that my mourning period over rejection is 24 hours. I allow myself that, where I walk around the house, I eat too much, I tell myself I'm a failure, I do all of those things, but I'm only allowed to do that for 24 hours and then I send it out again. Those are my little practical.
I think that's good advice. Good suggestions there from both of you. I really appreciate that. And I think that our viewers appreciate it as well. So you started touching on, Diana, you started talking about the fact that writers might not want to write to a specific call or to a specific prize. maybe we can take this opportunity to think about the current situation, right? That we're in this pandemic, we're in COVID, and perhaps there are a great number of writers who are writing their COVID stories. Should writers avoid trends when thinking about submissions? Should they avoid a certain topic that might be overly done or overdone by other writers? Can you talk about that? How to stand out? How to stand out in a pile of many submissions?
I read a critic, and I can't remember who. I've been trying to think who it was so that I could sound more intelligent. But I remember what the person said. And the person wrote that a story has to enfold you at the beginning, pull you in, and you're just right away in this world, character, situation set up. And I think that's the thing really that at the beginning of a story makes a difference. I found myself in having much more reading than I've ever had to do for PREE, for the Commonwealth writers, becoming a bit over it when I felt like, oh gosh, this is my story on whatever, whether it's a pandemic or climate change or, dystopian fiction or speculative fiction. There's a bunch of stuff that, you start seeing in if you get a big amount of submissions. So, but I think the most important thing is not to get so hooked up on that as to the unfolding part, the compelling part, the voice, the other things that make writing worthwhile. But if you do find yourself writing something that, okay, there are lots of pandemic stories, then I think you should think about where to send those things. So look at what the publication record of that particular place is. If they've already published, lots of pandemic stories, so their last issue had 6 pandemic stories, and you might consider that perhaps we can anticipate that their next issue is not going to have another 6 pandemic stories. So I think it's more of a question of matching what you've written to the right place, as opposed to functioning as a kind of censor. Okay, speculative fiction is off the table, dystopian stuff is off the table. Although I have received rejections from people, from a publisher specifically saying, we just got too much dystopian fiction right now. This is really nice, but I have too much of it. So that's the juggling act, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to echo that, I think with the pandemic, we here at Granta had huge amount of pandemic diaries, pandemic fiction, pandemic reportage, every angle of it. And at the start, we did publish a lot of that, but I think writing into the news cycle, it's so hard to hit that, to come out with something fast enough that you're actually still fresh by the time someone can get around to publishing it. If you're a super quick writer, and that's very lucky, and why not try for that? But I think for the most part, it's, as Diana says, chances are by the time you properly finish a piece, if you take Diana's very good advice and work slowly on your writing and set aside for a while and come back to it, often whatever trend you're writing into, if it's a news cycly thing like the pandemic, you'll have missed it. That said, I think anything can work when it's written well. I mean, although we had an issue called Still Lives, which was talking about the beginning of the pandemic, lots of pandemic stories and fiction and nonfiction. And we sort of said amongst ourselves editorially, all right, we've done this, we're looking for new things, we've done that. But in the most recent issue we're putting together, someone had submitted a piece of fiction that was set during the pandemic. Someone dies of coronavirus, they're in masks. But it was so artfully done. It didn't feel like just written off the back of this idea. It just felt like that evolved naturally. That was just part of this world this author was responding to. So we really enjoyed it. We've taken it and we're working with it. So yeah, I think that comes back to that point of just when you write, I think you should be trying to think about your writing practice almost sealed off from the idea of this prize, this this trend, and just really work on your writing alone and let it develop slowly. And the input you should be taking is input from the authors you admire most. I mean, read the authors you love and then imitate them and try and deconstruct what they do to make a scene vivid. You know, transpose it into the world you're writing. Just experiment that way. I think that's much more effective than saying, oh, this is in the news. Maybe if I write a story about it, you know, something will click. I think just take the time to focus on, yeah, the nuts and bolts of your own writing, and yeah, take it slowly.
Thank you. Right. It does seem, of course, that to be a better writer, you have to be a better reader. And I guess in that regard, do you all recommend that writers become more familiar with the interests of those who are judges, with the reading interests of those who are editors and publishers? Does that make sense for a potential writer? Should they do that?
I think just to jump in again, I think the more you read, the better. And you know, it's good to read outside your comfort zone and to try things you wouldn't normally try. So if looking at if you look at a journal or a judge and you see names on a list that you don't recognize, I think why not read? More sort of pragmatically, I think it is important to, if you're submitting somewhere, to know enough about the publication to anticipate the sort of things they publish. I mean, here sometimes I will read something that's really well written and great, but it's just not for Granta, and that may be because it's, you know, more journalistic, or it's you know, a straight genre, something that we don't necessarily do. So yeah, I think doing a little bit of research there is useful. But all for reading as a mode of learning and developing your craft.
Mm-hmm. Annie, can you jump in a bit and talk a bit about the PREE space, what you might recommend for those who are poets and writers that are submitting to PREE? What direction should writers go in terms of what to read?
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if this came up already, but one of the things I often wish is that people who submit work to us would read what we've already published to get a better idea of the kinds of material we are interested in, and also of the kind of quality of writing that we expect. And so I think that I have seen an improvement, a better fit over the 7 issues. I think people have got that point by themselves. And so we don't get as many random submissions that definitely don't make, you know, even begin to make the cut. We get much less of those now. But one thing I'm curious about, and, you know, more than make statements, I have questions, primarily for Luke. Because one thing we found, if you remember, Isis and Diana, with PREE, this is the first time. We've always so far had themed issues, and this issue, forthcoming issue 7, number 7, is the first one where we did not theme it deliberately, because we were interested in seeing whether we would get more submissions if there wasn't a theme attached to the issue. And in fact, indeed, we did. And so I'm curious about Granta, because Granta also uses themes for most of its issues. How often do you do unthemed issues, and have you seen a similar trend, Luke?
Yeah, that's a really good point about theming. One thing we sort of make a point of not announcing our themes to in our channel for submissions, because we almost prefer to have pieces come in unthemed, as you say, because I think people feel a bit freer, and then sort of build a theme around that. So we try to avoid announcing the themes in advance, and I think that comes back to that point about writing towards a specific idea. Sometimes that works out, but sometimes that sort of I think distracts a writer from, you know, what they might do otherwise. And often it's better for us to build around what comes in. And you know, if you our latest issue is called "I've Been Away for a While." It's sort of riffing on this idea of what's happened with Corona and everything, but it's a pretty loose theme, and within that we can contain a lot. But by the same token, sometimes we do very specifically themed issues. So the issue we're going to press with now is a list of the best young Spanish language novelists, and so that's a very specific thing. We're just looking at a specific group of Spanish language writers. So yeah, it varies, and that keeps things interesting. But yes, hello Kwame, and welcome.
Kwame, welcome Kwame. Kwame's joined us. Isis.
Yes, I see. Thank you so much for arriving here now. We are looking forward to your input. So right now we're thinking about clearly about publications, right? And we're thinking about, well, what is it that we're looking for? What are publishers looking for? What pieces get published and which pieces don't? So you can jump in any way that you would like to at this time.
I can catch up, but that's so broad that I don't even know where you were. I don't know where you were.
We've been in many places.
And the difficulty for me is that I wear multiple hats as a publisher. So it's, whether it's PREE, whether it's the African Poetry Series, whether it's the, Prairie Schooner, which is the journal that I edit all of these series, and so those questions differ for each of those. But I'm catching in. I'll jump in when I think, when you're playing when you're playing rope, you kind of have to watch carefully before you jump in, or else you
get tangled up.
You might hurt yourself.
There are no traps here, Kwame.
No. Oh, that's funny. I have a question here. This is for anyone that wants to answer it, and it might seem obvious that there is a particular kind of answer, but I guess I'd rather you all speak to why your answer is what it is. And the question is, should every writer work with an editor, even a lay editor, before submitting a piece? Which is to say, if I have this great story in my head and I'm writing it, should I have at least one person, even if it's my neighbor, should I have at least one person look over that work before submitting it to a journal, to a prize? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, the short answer is no. I mean, like that's just too much work. But what I would say though is, I think writers have to develop over time the capacity to distance themselves from their own work and become their own sort of editors. And otherwise, even when you get an editor to look at your work, you have to make the decision. So I think one of the great lessons that I pay attention to when I'm teaching writers is to think of themselves as their first reader. And that means a kind of imaginative separation of self. It's imaginative because, of course, we are who we are. We're still who we are. But if we can imagine ourselves separated from ourselves and then being driven by the things that delight us, that move us, that give us a critical sensibility, I think the great writers have the capacity to create that distance and to put in abeyance their empathy, the sort of necessary empathy for a moment. To then see what is happening, and I think that's what is most important. Having somebody else read your work is helpful, but it depends on who you ask. Like, there's some people who are not helpful, and there's no point to it. And I can't say that as an editor, when work comes to me, I can tell if somebody has had somebody else read it or not. I can't tell. It's not possible. So writers must know themselves. If you're lazy like me and you know that your work is going to be full of typos and all kinds of things, then yeah, get somebody to read it to clean that up. But yeah, it'll be unfair to ask people to, and sometimes unreasonable, because all writers are different and all writers' experiences are different. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've benefited from first readers. I would not call them editors really, because they're not necessarily, you know, I mean, editing is a very detailed and lengthy process, and I would say expert too, you know. But I have been helped by people who read my work in an early stage, and they are people that I trust and that I've developed a relationship with over the years. And I'm willing to hear from them, boy, Diana, this just does not work, you know? So I do have early readers who can sometimes tamp down my, you know, over enthusiasm about a piece, and I've benefited from that. So I will say that.
Anyone else want to jump in? Okay.
I think it can't hurt to have other people read your work.
Oh, but you know it can hurt. It literally can
well,
hurt. What are you talking about?
You gotta choose. You gotta choose carefully there. You gotta choose. I mean, I think what you're saying about being your own best editor.
Really hurt.
You gotta be your own editor. But if you gotta choose someone sensitive to the writer's ego, someone who's not gonna totally shoot you down. But there's definitely like small things, you know, things that make sense in your head that sometimes don't come across on the page. I think especially for writers starting out, and those things can be picked out by most kind of careful readers. But yeah, you gotta be careful who you ask, I guess.
Yeah, I think that depending on who you pick, it can be useful. And when I started writing a column in a Jamaican newspaper called The Herald in the mid-90s. And because I'm technically a foreigner, I'm from India originally, although now I've spent much more time in Jamaica than in India. I've been here for 32 years. But I remember when I first started writing my column, I had the benefit of a reader who reviewed everything before I submitted it, particularly to avoid, you know, huge glaring cultural errors. But this person was also an excellent writer, right? And so he was also teaching me how to write better in the process. And for me, that was a very, very important foundational exercise. And so I totally get you, Kwame. If you have the wrong person read your work, and I know you had a foundational trauma in that regard.
So
put it that way.
Foundational trauma.
But you could say, Kwame, that has only spurred you on to greater heights.
No, I didn't. That wasn't an invited commentary.
I know.
That was completely. Somebody thought themselves generous enough to help me out, but no.
Okay.
Yeah. So no. The reason I'm being this way about it is that I think all writers are going to have to be different, and I do think that at the end of the day, even for all of those of you like Diana and so on who say, look, I have my readers and so on and so forth, you do know that something that has developed in you has been developed over time, a greater facility to actually know your shtick, know the little things that you normally do wrong and so on and so forth, and know how to assess what people are telling you and so on. And that, I think what I really want to emphasize, the value of building that critical sense in you, that part of your role in structuring your approach to that. And I'm not this, look, and I work with so many writers, and different writers need different things. I have writers who want me to fight them. I have writers who want me to just say, you're amazing, and they will work out the rest. And that's just human, you know. So but does that help you get the work sort of finally done? Because you see, my problem is you get it done however you get it done, but get it done. That's the problem. You get however you're gonna get it done, but get it done. You know. So yeah. So I think it's important, but it has its value.
Okay, so mainly for typos and clarity, but you know, the writer should.
No, I never said that. Oh, yeah, change more means. I never said that.
I'm summarizing everyone's words. Okay. So I have a question for everyone here. And I see that there is a note here in the chat box. So it's actually kind of working with this and also a general question, which is what should a writer do when you get no feedback at all, right? So you make your submission and you just never hear from the space ever again. The journal doesn't contact you. You don't know if you've been rejected. The assumption is, time has passed so that you've been rejected, but you don't have any indication as to what went wrong. What do you do with that?
Move on.
Just move.
Yeah, I sort of give myself, I try and make sure I have some idea of what the approval or rejection timeframes are. And when I started out at first, it was rare that anybody would tell you, oh, our review period is 3 months or 5 months or 6 months. But I say it's more common now that you'll see some indication when a submission is being our review time is 3 months or 6 months, right? And I allow myself one follow-up email. So, and then if that is not answered, I have a spreadsheet where I keep track of where I've sent stuff because the old brain not so sharp anymore. And I just put in there, no answer, and then I send it somewhere else. I think this is one of the hard things about rejection, and you rarely do get something more substantial when you get a rejection. It's often a form letter. I can't tell you how many letters I have gotten which tell me my writing is stunning, it's amazing, it's breathtaking, it's words like that, but not for us, right? So it's very rare that someone engages actually with what you've said. And I've had a couple experiences like that, which were foundational and formative. And one of them was for the early manuscript of Dogheart, which I sent slush pile, big agent. I had very big dreams in the beginning. And they did send back 12 pages of critique, which was eventually made me revise it and it found publication. That's very rare though. So, this part of it to me is hard. It is hard, it is difficult. So for me, I've just decided whatever time period they say, I will wait. And then I send one follow-up. And if I don't hear anything, I move on. That's my strategy. Did I mention the crying part? There's some crying in there as well.
Of course. Any other thoughts?
Well, let me address the people tree thing. I think every all right, let's put it in sort of a kind of reality. If you're a Caribbean writer and you're writing Caribbean word, there are limited places that you feel, okay, these are go-to places that I can get a fair shake. You can try, other places, but, that do not have a record of publishing Caribbean writers. And if your suspicion is that is going to be a problem, it's not an inaccurate suspicion. It's just true that publishers have sort of knee-jerk reactions and say this is not for us kind of thing. So that there are limits, and therefore when you as a Caribbean writer send to a place like People Tree, who publish and so on and so forth, and you don't get an answer, I think it can be disconcerting, it can be debilitating, and it can be very, very, very much a problem. I think, though, that in the particular, what was in the chat was not speaking about, I think the chat comment was really fair to say, look, if you don't like it, just reject it and let me move on, but don't keep me waiting with nothing, right? And I suppose I think that is a fair kind of expectation. So what would happen is, because I publish with People Tree and I work with People Tree, I think I can say that one of the things that might help you to sort of have a perspective on what is going on is that that's my bad dog. Is that People Tree is two people, right? And largely one person who is reading the fiction and making all the decisions on the fiction. People Tree receives work from the Caribbean, all over the Caribbean, but increasingly from what we call the Black British experience. And then People Tree receives work from parts of Asia, from the past colonial places like India, Pakistan, and so on and so forth. And there's one person for the fiction, Sometimes two people for fiction. That's Jeremy Pointing, the editor, and Jacob, who does
Ross, yeah.
Jacob Ross, who does fiction with him. And then for poetry, it's myself and Jeremy Pointing. So what happens therefore is that you can be fairly, if you think about it and you think about the numbers that come in to be reviewed, the delay is largely driven by just pure person power, just that. Now, that's not helpful, and that's no excuse, because here's the thing. I'm not telling you this as an excuse. I'm telling you this as a perspective. Therefore, it does not necessarily translate that no response means they're not interested in your work, right? It doesn't translate that way. And so if there was somebody talking, if I was talking to you, I'd say keep harassing them. Just keep harassing them. If if the work is still available, but don't hold it if you can send it elsewhere, but you still keep harassing them. So that's the best I can say to you on that front. But I agree with that. I mean, look, the rejection thing is just something that you have to build a system around. I mean, I always remember that the year my book Midland was published in the state, because I was published by PREE for a few years before that, about 4 or 5 books, but I wanted to see if I could get a book published in the US because this is where I live. I sent it was rejected at least 40 times before it won the Hollis Summers Prize, right? And so what does that mean? And, but my thing was, this is a good book. I know it's a good book, so I'm just going to keep sending it until somebody picks it up. I've met some of the editors who rejected it, and they tell me all the stories about the meetings they had and how, we really blah, 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 blah. That didn't feel that way from where I sat, right? So I do think that you kind of have to build, I think Diana is right, that you kind of have to build a system that says, I'm going to persist and just keep pushing the thing out. The good news is, in the last 20 years, I would say the last 10 years, with the advent of Submittable and so on and so forth, more writers in international spaces are finding greater access into publishing in the US markets and the UK markets. And I think one of the secrets to that attention would be to take advantage of access to publishing in journals in those places because of Submittable. Because believe it or not, I think editors and agents look at your publication list where your stories have appeared and so on and so forth to feel, okay, this person has already published in this part of the world. They may not say it that way, but I think it makes them feel as if somebody already has endorsed them in this space, and therefore it's translated into this space. So journal publication may seem like nothing you're interested in, you just want to publish your novel, but it is a good thing to do to create a track record of that kind of publication, because it does make you more interesting to agents. As many of you know, agents here, there are some agents who will scour journals and then I get calls as editor of Prairie Schooner from agents saying, you publish so and so, do you have the address? I'm interested in them. Because I think I love the story that they sent. So that happens all the time. And whether that translates into publication or not, at least it's one way to think about. And that's especially for international based writers. A lot of Nigerian writers and so on and so forth, which we publish a lot in Prairie Schooner, writers from different parts of Africa and from the Caribbean have appeared in Prairie Schooner, have then had berths at American pub presses, largely because of that appearance. It just sort of makes people feel, okay, they're not strange people.
They're not strange.
I'm glad that Kwame brought up agenting, because I was about to do that. Because that example of Lisa, who submitted her manuscript to PREE and so on, I mean, ideally, she should not have to do that herself. She should be represented by an agent. But one of the problems we in the Caribbean have is that there are no Caribbean agents. And it is very difficult to attract the attention of the international agents who can place this work with reputable publishers. So that I don't know, with the changing landscape of publishing, whether it still makes sense for people here to try to become agents themselves or just use the existing ones out there. I don't know. What do you think?
Listen, you know my view. My view is anybody can become an agent.
But you need to know the ins and outs of.
Yeah, but you only know it if you push it. Like, here's an agent that if you are in the Caribbean and you say,
Right.
I'm a Caribbean agent for Caribbean writers, you've already kind of started to create a market, a corner that it's like publicists. You know, people, anybody just get up and say, I'm going to be a publicist, but you do need to know what it's about. But I'm saying that if you're interested in that, first of all, you can start thinking of that as a career approach. By the way, you know, it's a side career to start off. But I think if you think of it in that kind of way, then it's good to start asking, because we don't get enough of those questions. I get people saying, I want to publish a novel. I want to publish my books. I don't get enough people calling me and say, I want to be an agent. I want to see what I can do. Who can I talk to? Because I guarantee you, if you come to me and say, I want to be an agent and see what I can do there, I can put you on to many agents who will talk to you.
Great.
Because
Expect a message from me.
Yeah, there's no pressure.
I'll call you later, Kwame. I'll call you later.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, because there's no pressure on them, because you're not begging them to publish a book or to sell a book for them. All you're doing is asking them, how does this thing work, right? How does this work? I think, and by that I mean, listen, I'm not saying it's like automatic and it's just straightforward, but if you have the intention, that path can be created and you can become a kind of brokering agent in the Caribbean. It's possible. Yeah. Now, the question is, will the good novelist, I only choose novelists because nobody is representing poets.
Right.
Nobody. Don't even bother with it. If you don't have if you don't have a memoir or a novel that you say, well, I'm working on one, no agent is coming to you as a poet. I'm me a big poet and nobody's talking to me about none. Right? Right? No agent interested in me. Because why? Because no money in it. Like, I get a $1,000 advance on my, and the agent says, so only $200 I get for all the work me do. No, they won't do it. Right? So, and I think it's a stupid attitude, because, you know, eventually people like me can bring in money to you, but that's another story. I don't want to get distracted by that. But for novelists, the anxiety that an aspiring agent will have is to say, will I get Diane McCaulay to come to me as somebody who's just starting off? Because Diane McCaulay, a big writer, so she's going to want a big agent who can open doors for her and talk to the big presses and so on. So that would be the anxiety. But I think if you want to start, you can start from the beginning. If you see a good novelist that is coming up, you can start working with them and so on. It don't cost you a tremendous amount because everything is online right now, right? So it doesn't cost you that much. And you might start to see some momentum that takes place around that. I think it's possible, right? But like I say, it takes some work, and, you know, but nobody comes to me and says, boy, I'm trying to be an agent. What can I do? Mm-hmm. We've seen people who are interested in being publishers, and we've tried to broker and make arrangements with them to work with other publishers abroad and see whether they can model and work together and so on and so forth, because that's something you can learn as a skill. So there's a whole industry that we just don't want to touch, right? Yeah. And it would be like in Jamaica, where we don't, like in reggae music, it would be like saying, boy, I just want to be a singer, you know, but the person who say I want to be a producer and an engineer, that is and they, look at what engineering and producing has done to Jamaican reggae music, because those people took that on.
Right.
I just want to say that after 10 years, I still don't have an agent. It was easy to find publication for books and for articles, as you said, Kwame, submit to, you know, places where if it's in your bio, you get a whole different eye. Yes. But finding an agent has been harder for me than getting publication.
That's why there's a need for Caribbean agents.
I think so. I think so. Mm-hmm. There's a question in the chat. I see about costs. So I do want to.
Please. Okay. So I'm just going to frame it for all, because I'm not sure everyone can see it. And this kind of pulls together several points that have been made already. I know, Luke, you had mentioned submittable earlier, and you talked about the history of publishing, right? Where individuals have to put something in an envelope and send it off, and there's a cost. And part of that helps to make the experience a bit more serious, and perhaps the writer will take things more seriously. But the question that's coming to us here is about essentially paywalls. If writers are expected to read in the journals that they want to submit to, and of course, as Kwame is pointing out, past publications can lead to future publications, right? So if you're required to or expected to be reading these publications, what do you do when you can't afford subscriptions, right? So is it enough to be able to just read the free trial versions or the limited access of publications, or should writers also have to pay this money? What do you suggest? And Diana, I think you're ready to go.
No, we editors of major publications, and I know Luke has a lot to say about this, so I'll just talk quickly and then Luke enjoyed it. We like to tell people that if you want to publish with us, you should read our journal, and you should take out a subscription, because we want subscribers. Like that's the truth. But as a writer, look, you can go to Prairie Schooner online, and in a few minutes you can get a sense of, without paying anybody, get a sense of what we publish, because we feature some of the work online. Like that happens. So you can get a sense. You can go to Granta online and know right away what Granta does. So and we don't. I never look at somebody sending work to me and say, did they read our journal? I never do that. Like I just read the work and I go, no, yeah, no, yeah. I didn't bother read your bio, right? So the truth is, it's a good practice so that you don't waste time. Right. Like if you're sending work to an experimental poetry journal and you send them a short story, it's possible that they may think, wow, that's an innovative approach to the poem. Or most likely they'll say, you just don't know who we are. So why, right. But that's not, they're not going to sit down and put you on a blacklist now as, oh my God, don't ever think about this. But they're just going to go, no, because every journal, what you want is an opportunity to say no. I get 3,000 submissions a month, like 3,000 submissions of poetry a month. My task, my readers and so on, all they're looking for is an opportunity to say no. And saying no is just no. Like, I don't have to think about it. And we say no. It's not a judgment on the person. It's just a moment that is made, and so on and so forth. So no, you don't have to read. You don't have to subscribe to the journal to know more about the journal, and the internet is making that so much not necessary. Now, look, hey, if you submit, if you subscribe, we love it, right? We pay attention, but I don't think I've never published somebody because they subscribe to our journal. Now, I publish people. I'm more sympathetic to people who write reviews for us, but that's another story.
Okay, but that's a good nugget. Okay, Diana?
I say that there are costs involved. Most prizes now are not free. It is the unusual one that is free. So, and there's some places where if you enter, you do have to subscribe to the journal that you're entering for. So there are costs involved. I try to think about, so there's the whole creative side of writing, which is the part that most of us want to do. But then there's the other part, which is the business section, which certainly I don't want to do. Let me not speak broadly, but I don't want to do, and I dislike. But there is that part that has to be done. So I actually have a position that I will spend every dollar of any advance I get on the costs of trying to, to get published, build a readership, whatever. I mean, it includes other things as well, all the book promotion stuff. You need graphics, you need a whole bunch of stuff. If anyone is listening to this and imagining that they're going to have a writing career that's going to make them rich, I'd like to say that's just highly unlikely. I mean, yes, of course, there are the few people that we all know about, but it's just highly unlikely. So if that's your motivation, it's not going to carry you through week after week. So I actually have a budget that I allow myself to spend on entering things. And yeah, so there are costs involved, and it's like any other business. I mean, you wouldn't start to sell, I don't know, soap, and imagine that you have to produce the soap, market the soap, package the soap, as the soap, and there are costs in being a writer too.
Yeah, I think you guys both make great points and sort of cover this all. I just want to say, can focus maybe too much on all, being writers and wanting to get published, but we need readers too. I mean, if everyone's just publishing their writing and not subscribing to any magazines, who's going to read your piece, right? And at the end of the day, it's important to really take part in that community and to read as much as you write, and that'll make you a better writer. It'll make you a more informed writer. It'll help you. There's a cost, but you don't subscribe to everything. Don't subscribe to every journal that says you have to subscribe to submit. I mean, think carefully, read the free pieces. Think, is this something I like? Is this something I feel like I'm getting into that's inspiring me? This is giving me some motivation to do my own writing. I think choose the journals carefully, but it's important to keep that industry going. It's a funny industry, and we need readers too.
Yeah.
I have
I'll just say quickly, Annie, that recently I had a cry from the heart from a Kingston bookshop there, and that moved me to reach out to my social media contacts to say, look, guys, if we want bookshops and reading and literature and support for Caribbean writers, we all have to tool down to the bookshop and buy a Caribbean title, because they're struggling, especially in COVID. So if we want this to succeed, we have to participate, and we have to buy books and read books and subscribe to journals and be part of a writing community that does have some costs.
I have a question for Luke. I know Granta does these foreign editions, and earlier you mentioned a Best Young Spanish Writers edition that's going to be coming out. And I wanted to say, isn't it time to do a Best Young Caribbean Writers?
I think that would be great.
Right.
An issue focused on Caribbean writing. I mean, I think that's a fantastic. I'm going to actually suggest that to our editor.
Great.
Yeah, they come up different country focuses. It's sort of here and there, and I think it is about time we do a focus on. So,
well, if you need any help, PREE is there.
Oh well.
Look at us making deals all over the This is nice. I have a couple of questions. One is coming from the YouTube chat box. And so this question is asking for advice. I guess quick advice, because we're already at 1:20. So we only have 10 minutes left of this session. So how can one self-design a curriculum to help build writing? So not just the suggestion of read extensively and it will increase your writing, write daily, it will make your writing better. But is there any other suggestion you can give to a writer poet that they can do outside of an MFA program, right? So budget friendly. What other suggestions do you have?
I'd say, Google is your friend, right? And a lot of great writers, great teachers have their syllabus online, and a lot of universities will post the syllabus. I mean, it's not the legit way, but you can see what's being taught. It's not the same as going into a classroom and having someone really think about and respond to your work, but you can get a sense of what's being read and at least try and get started on some of that yourself, I suppose.
Okay. Any other suggestions? Okay, as you can continue to think about that one. I'll pose this other question in the meantime, just because we're being aware of time. So how would you narrow down a short list? What is that process like, right? So you've been able to take your 1,000 submissions, 10,000 submissions, you get down to a short list. This is for prizes. What makes a winner a winner?
This is for prizes? I'm not sure I understand the question. Like as a judge?
Yes, as a judge for writing prizes, how do you make that leap from, how does a writer go from the shortlist pile to being the winner in that shortlist of the prize?
Yeah, that's it just depends on who the judges are, and it can range from political, it can range from history and so on and so forth, or it can I think my view is always that once you clear like the long list, everybody can win. Like it depends on what the dynamics of that group is. That's why judging is a very funny thing, like I don't know if you've noticed, like here in the States, that how many more Black poets or poets of color are winning prizes. This was not accidental.
Right.
The judging panels changed. More people of color became judges. That's what happened with poetry in America. And that's within the last 20 years. Remember, Toni Morrison couldn't win a prize in America, like nothing.
Right.
Until Black writers came together and put an ad in the New York Times and said, what's up with that? This is after Toni Morrison had published several of her the novels that are classic novels now. She couldn't win a prize because who was sitting on those panels? It's nothing to do with quality. It's just to do with a kind of recognition that the broader your judging base, the more likely that. So we can't. You see, quality is a funny thing, you know. And I think sometimes if somebody says, "Boy, I win the Pulitzer, I'm a great writer," not necessarily. Like it doesn't, because like who remembers who won the Pulitzer in 1986? Who won the Pulitzer in poetry in '86? Like, do you remember that? No, you don't remember that because that doesn't, you know what, there are many people, look at the Pulitzer list and you'll be like, who is this? Who is that? Who is that? Who is that? So that's not the test because you don't know what happened in that journey. I've sat in panels and I watch people operate like nothing. So I think it's fair to say that the long list tells you it's the most sincere way of thinking about quality and so on and so forth. But as you start getting down to the short list and so on and so forth, then other dynamics start to play a significant role. Now, people would like to, if you talk to the Booker people, they will pretend that, oh, it's all quality. But you saw what happened in the last Booker Prize, right? When they split it between Margaret Atwood and Bernadette Evaristo. Now, why do you think that happened? You really think that was just a question of people thinking quality? No, that was people saying, look, they're all great. So why are we picking this one instead of that one? And what does that mean in this time, in this year hour? What does it mean? What are the implications of that? What is your track record as a prize? And who have you left out, right? And who have you not left out? Do you know people go to Ngugi wa Thiong'o's home every year at the time of the Nobel? Reporters sit out. Ngugi tells the story of reporters. His wife has to bring them tea and everything like that, and then commiserate with them so that they don't bawl and fall out because he never wins. And you're going to tell me that Ngugi is not a good writer? No, Ngugi knows better than that. So we know that it's not at that point. So if you are a writer and you get on a long list, embrace it.
Yeah, that's a bit I want to support now that I have experience with being the judge of a prize.
Yeah.
Is that there's actually much more attention that's given to the compilation of that long list, to the words and to the actual writing than the process that occurs after that, you know. And well, I haven't participated yet in the next stages, but I can imagine that I've had people though when I have been on a long list or a short list and not one, which is the majority of my own experience. I've had people contact me and say, "Boy, it was close," you know. But I think at that point when you're, you know, if you make it onto the short list, there's a whole heap of other things in play about who actually is the winner. These are some of the things that as writers you kind of have to understand about it so that you don't, you know, take it too much inside, and it can make you stop writing. It can be erased as that, you know.
Well, there's a lot to, I guess, digest here. Is this another question? No, okay, sorry. So it sounds like the tides are turning, the tides are shifting with regard to literary spaces, right? The spaces for publishing, the spaces for entering prizes, and the opportunities are growing, especially for those of us who are in the Caribbean or writing out of the Caribbean. And perhaps as more of us step into the space of agents, it can bring about even more change. So I guess we'll all be doing the work. Does anyone have any comments that they want to make, suggestions they want to offer to those who are viewing, questions that weren't covered and you just want to raise those points?
I'd just like to say thanks once again to our sponsors, the Shuttleworth Foundation and the Prince Claus Fund. Because, you know, without help like that, I mean, one thing about PREE, it is a digital open access platform, and we have to find ways of sustaining it, and we have to find a revenue model. We don't want to necessarily feature ads. We don't want to charge subscribers. We want to keep it open access. So that's something that we are thinking about. And that was one of the reasons, one of the rationales for publishing the book version or an edition of selections from the first 5 issues of PREE was that eventually, I mean, not just the fact that its materiality is so, you know, actually holding a book. I'm sorry, I'm so gung-ho about digital everything, but nothing can beat the experience of actually holding a real life book. But in addition to that, it can eventually become a revenue earner, you know, because people will want the book because it does have excellent content. And so these are the ways. I mean, we have a writing studio with the top writers, you know, people like Ingrid Prasad, Marlon James, Kai Miller, that we've had to postpone for the 3rd time now because of COVID. But eventually we will get it off the ground and it will be a money earner. So we need to think about ways in which to sustain our writing apart from the traditional ways, which are all becoming obsolete.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you all to participants, panelists for sharing your words and sharing your time today. Thank you, Diana McCaulay. Thank you, Luke Naima. Thank you, Dingo, for your poetry. Thank you, Annie Paul. Thank you, Kwame Dawes, for joining us. I just want to remind everyone that Bookmarked, PREE's first print anthology, will be available for you to have and to hold starting next month. It's at the printers right now, so that is great news. But if you follow us on our social media accounts, which are at PREE-Lit Mag on Instagram and PREE-Lit on Twitter, you'll be able to find out exactly what that date is. And it'll be available through all of the usual avenues so that you can grab your copy in Jamaica, throughout the Caribbean, and around the world. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for joining us. And I guess we will bid you adieu. Take care, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.